Some games fail because they're bad, but these games failed in spite of being great. Welcome to a list of games that brought the heat, whether through clever mechanics, solid gameplay, or just doing something different, and still ended up ignored, buried, or forgotten. Let's get into 9 brilliant games that flopped but totally slap. First on the list we have a game called Enslaved Odyssey to the West, a really solid game that just didn't get the attention it deserved. It dropped back in 2010, right in the middle of a flood of bigger titles, and even though reviews were mostly promising, it just didn't sell that well. Some blame the name of the title, others say it just wasn't marketed properly, but either way, Namco wasn't exactly thrilled with the numbers. The gameplay mixes third-person combat with some light platforming and a few basic puzzles here and there. You're mostly using a staff for melee attacks, with a couple of ranged moves to deal with tougher enemies or to keep things moving. It's not trying to be super deep, but it gives you just enough to stay interested the whole way through. Story-wise, you play as a character called Monkey, a loner who wakes up on a crashed slave ship and ends up linked to Trip, a tech-savvy prisoner who needs help getting home. She hacks a headband onto you that links your life to hers. So if she dies, you'll also die. And just like that, you're stuck, escorting her across a dangerous world. It's honestly a really cool game, just one of those titles that slipped through the cracks. But if you're into action games with a strong story and a clear sense of direction, Enslaved is absolutely worth your time. Next up, we have The Order 1886, a title that really showed off what the PS4 was capable of, but still ended up as one of the generation's biggest missed opportunities. When it dropped in early 2015, the visuals were genuinely next level. Cinematic camera work, rich environments, and smooth transitions between cutscenes and gameplay, it all looked incredible. But looking great wasn't good enough. Reviews came in mixed, players felt let down, and Sony quietly shelved the IP not long after launch. The actual gameplay is a cover-based third-person shooter, and pretty stripped down in terms of mechanics. You're mostly ducking behind walls, firing off rounds, and moving through very controlled set pieces. It plays fine, but it feels like it's mostly there to support the cutscenes, and not the other way around. The setting is what really gives it some flavor. You're in an alternate history London as part of a secret group that hunts half-breed monsters with advanced, steampunk-style tech. The mix of historical fiction and sci-fi actually works, and some of the weapons, like the arc gun, are really fun to use. The downside is that the game wraps up just as it starts building momentum. But there's something about the tone and the presentation that just feels damn good. And for a PS4 game, it looked insane when it came out, and honestly, it still holds up today. With that said, I would say that The Order is definitely worth your time. But it's also a good example of why strong visuals alone aren't always enough. Third on the list is Days Gone, a game that technically sold well, but still ended up feeling like a disappointment in Sony's eyes. It moved over 8 million copies, and also got solid engagement once it hit PlayStation Plus. But the early reviews were mixed, and a lot of that came down to the slow start of the game. That was enough for Sony to pass on a sequel, even though it eventually found its footing and built a pretty loyal fanbase. In terms of mechanics, Days Gone is an open-world survival game where you play as Deacon St. John, a biker drifting through a post-apocalyptic Oregon. You've got third-person shooting, stealth, crafting, and a heavy focus on your motorcycle. It's not just transportation, as you need to fuel it, upgrade it, and keep it in good shape, or else you're not getting far. The big hook here is the Freakers, massive zombie hordes that can overwhelm you fast if you're not careful. Running into one unprepared is basically a death sentence. The early game is where a lot of players bounced off, since it leans a bit too much into the lone wolf survivor vibe, and the opening hours don't do much to shake that off. But as the story moves forward, the character work gets better, and it slowly builds into something more engaging. So while Days Gone wasn't a flop in the traditional sense, it didn't quite hit the mark Sony was hoping for. Still, if you're into open-world survival games with a strong atmosphere and don't mind a slower start, it's definitely worth checking out.
Okay, here we go.
Next up, Mirror's Edge. It's one of those games that felt completely fresh when it landed, and instead of giving you guns and explosions, it put you into a clean, futuristic city and asked you to move fast. You play as Faith, a runner navigating rooftops, pipes, and tight corridors using parkour. The game's all about momentum. Run, jump, slide, and wall climb. Chain it all together, and it clicks into the smooth rhythm that few games have matched since. Combat is technically there, but it's more of an obstacle than a feature. You can disarm enemies or throw a punch or two, but the game clearly wants you to keep moving. Slowing down to fight feels clunky, which is kind of the point. It's not about domination, it's about speed and precision. The visual style is bright whites, bold primary colors, and clean geometry that turns the city itself into one big obstacle course. It's striking, no question, but that same uniqueness made it hard to market. A first-person platformer with minimal combat didn't exactly scream mass appeal in 2008. The reviews were decent, but sales were underwhelming. And even though it built a cult following, EA waited nearly 8 years before giving it another shot with Mirror's Edge Catalyst. Even now, there's nothing quite like it. So if you like the idea of mastering flow over firepower, Mirror's Edge still feels ahead of its time, and way too overlooked for what it brought to the table. Coming up next is Alpha Protocol, a spy RPG that aimed for something bold and different, and kind of crashed on the landing. Released in 2010 by Obsidian, this was their take on espionage, but with a full RPG backbone. You play as Michael Thornton, an agent cut loose in a world of covert operations, political games, and shifting loyalties. It plays like a third-person action game, but under the hood, it's all stats, choices, and consequences. You can build your character however you want, like stealth, pistols, hacking, tech gadgets, and every mission gives you room to approach it your way. Sneak in and disable security quietly, or kick the door down and shoot your way out. The systems are flexible, but the mechanics are a bit rough. Where it gets interesting is in how choices actually matter. You're not just picking lines for the sake of it. Your tone, whether it's professional, aggressive, or sarcastic, changes how people react to you. And those reactions can shift alliances, open up or block missions, even change how the whole story plays out. Not many games commit to branching paths the way Alpha Protocol does, and that's where it really shines. So why did it flop? Mostly because it wasn't ready. It launched buggy, looked a bit dated, so it got slammed for being unpolished. But underneath all that, Alpha Protocol is something rare, a spy RPG that actually lets you shape the experience. If you can deal with the rough edges, the depth of choice still holds up, and that alone makes it worth playing. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is a great example of a game that flopped for reasons outside of its control. It launched in 2021, just months after Marvel's Avengers left a bad taste in everyone's mouth, and most people assumed this was going to be more of the same. It really wasn't. But by the time word got out that it was actually good, the damage had already been done. Square Enix even admitted the sales fell short of what they expected. Anyways, you play as Star-Lord, who's leading the Guardians on a mission that's equal parts action as it is comedy. It is third-person combat with a twist. You're not just shooting, you're giving orders to the rest of the team in real time. Each Guardian has unique abilities, and once you get the hang of mixing them together, the combat starts to click. And it's more tactical than it looks on the surface, especially in the later part of the game. There's also some exploration, dialogue choices, and puzzles, but the real strength is the writing. It's fun, sharp, and has that snappy, sarcastic energy you'd expect from a Guardians movie. Looks great, sounds great, and is just a complete story-driven experience. Unfortunately, that just wasn't enough to overcome the bad PR left behind by the Avengers. So if you skipped Guardians thinking it'd be another letdown, this one's worth circling back to, as it's one of the better narrative games in recent years.
Do you suppose that puddle was their brethren?
Why do you think I'm avoiding it?
This time you're not mowing down xenomorphs, you're hiding from one. You play as Amanda, the daughter of Ellen Ripley, and is trying to uncover what happened to her mother, while trapped on a derelict space station that's slowly falling apart. This isn't an action game. You're not blasting aliens left and right. You're sneaking, crawling, hiding, and holding your breath, while a single deadly xenomorph hunts you down. And the AI is pretty unpredictable, which keeps the tension high. But that is also part of what held it back. A lot of players expected something closer to a shooter, and the slow pacing, long campaign, and punishing difficulty turned some people off. It reviewed well, but sales were underwhelming. Sega wanted a bigger hit, and despite its strong critical reputation, a sequel never materialized. Still, what Alien Isolation delivered was something rare, true survival horror with a smart, reactive enemy. It didn't just borrow the movie's look, it nailed the tone and atmosphere too. So if you like stealth, tension, and horror done right, this one still holds up as something special. Moving on to Sunset Overdrive, a game that had style, energy, and solid gameplay, but still struggled to make an impact. Launched in 2014 as an Xbox One exclusive, right when the console was trying to recover from a messy rollout, which limited the player base right from the start, and despite strong reviews, it never reached the audience it deserved. So what's the game about? In a nutshell, a toxic energy drink mutates half the city into monsters, and Sunset Overdrive wastes no time turning that disaster into a playground of pure chaos. You play as a completely customizable character, and the tone is loud, irreverent, and constantly breaking the fourth wall through its dialogue and writing. The game knows it's ridiculous, and it fully commits to that. The movement is also important here, as you're grinding on rails, while running, bouncing across rooftops, and chaining it all together nonstop. The faster and smoother you move, the more powerful and effective your combat becomes. The weapons match that energy too, with everything from explosive teddy bears to record launchers that pushes you to experiment and keep things stylish. Even with all that going for it, Sunset Overdrive never quite broke through. Being tied to a single platform, especially one that had a lot of complaints early on, really hurt its reach. Sure, the tone didn't land for everyone, but Sunset Overdrive brought something different, and if you don't mind things getting a little ridiculous, it's absolutely worth a play.
Yeah, aren't tornadoes the tornadoes of death?
Looks clear. Let's get out of here.
Let's wrap this up with Titanfall 2, a game that had everything going for it except the release date. It launched in 2016, right between Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, all three published by EA. So Titanfall 2 got buried, plain and simple. It reviewed well, players loved it, but most people never got around to it, and that crushed its momentum. The campaign is short, but it's excellent. You play as Jack Cooper, a soldier who ends up linked to a Titan named BT, and what starts as a typical shooter turns into something way more creative. The level design constantly throws new ideas at you, platforming, puzzles, even time travel, and it all stays sharp from start to finish. It's one of those rare FPS campaigns that people still talk about years later, and that for good reasons. Movement is tight and fast. While running, double jumping, and sliding, it all flows together and makes you feel in control. Combat feels just as good, and the way the game shifts between playing as a pilot and controlling a Titan keeps things fresh the whole way through. Multiplayer was just as strong. It was fast, skill-based, and full of unique mechanics that set it apart from the usual shooters. But with so many big releases crowding the spotlight, it never found the player base it needed to keep going long-term. Titanfall 2 didn't flop because it wasn't good. It flopped because it got dropped into a bad release window. If you skipped it, now's the time to fix that. It's still one of the best shooters of the last decade. And that's the list, 9 brilliant games that flopped, but totally slap. Whether it was bad timing, poor marketing, or just getting overlooked, every game here deserved way more love than it got. If you've played any of these, or if you think I missed one that belongs on the list, drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, or maybe even sub if you want more stuff like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.